upping the ante, and this is without a doubt ominous. The dictator of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, has a message to the United States, and here's a hint. It's not a message of peace. We're going to tell you what he said later this hour. Meanwhile, some maybe good news. President Trump has another prospect of peace on the horizon. Today, there were some big developments coming out of Ukraine. We're going to check in with our correspondent on the ground in Kyiv, Shelby Wilder, in just a moment. Also ahead this hour, former FBI Director James Comey, who maintains his innocence, might still wish he were as lucky as this turkey. This bird got a presidential pardon from Trump today. And another big name in Washington is calling it quits, the mayor. First elected mayor in November 2014, she has had a complicated on and off relationship with President Trump. Plus, urgent news from the medical world about sleep apnea. A new study warns this common sleep disorder is linked to something very serious. A doctor who led the sleep apnea study joins me this hour. And, of course, our outrage of the day. Today it is a guy who dressed up like his dead mother. Find out why in this outrageous story with some weird twists that you just can't make up. And as the United States renews its push for peace between Russia and Ukraine, overnight Russia launched a wave of attacks on Ukraine's capital city of Kyiv. The strikes killed 7 people and hit city buildings as well as energy infrastructure. Ukraine also struck southern Russia, killing 3 and damaging homes. Foreign correspondent Shelby Wilder is in Kyiv, Ukraine, with the very latest. Shelby?
Good evening, Greta. Great to be with you. Yeah, as intense peace negotiations have unfolded across the globe, Russia launched a new wave of deadly attacks. It was a long and difficult day here. That's what President Zelensky said. And Kyiv was rocked by explosions and air defense fire. Shelters were packed with families, children, and people with their pets riding out these Russian strikes. The threat carried into the morning, and even at 8 a.m. local time, kamikaze drones were still over the city center as air defenses worked to intercept them. But at that point, Ukrainians just had to go about their day. As a result, as you noted, 7 people were killed in the capital, 20 others injured, including a child, after residential apartment blocks were hit. The city of Odessa in the south of Ukraine also faced significant damage from the attacks. In total, Russia launched 22 missiles and more than 460 drones. And Ukraine wasn't the only country affected. I mean, neighboring Romania had to scramble its fighter jets after 2 Russian drones crossed into its and NATO's airspace, and Moldova said that 6 Russian drones also violated its territory. Again, that's not the first time that has happened for either of those countries in this war. In terms of diplomacy, American and Russian officials held secretive talks in Abu Dhabi. U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll met with Russian representatives yesterday and again today to discuss the latest peace plan, which President Donald Trump has said has now been fine-tuned. Driscoll was in Kyiv last week for meetings with the Ukrainians, and a U.S. official said that the talks with the Russians in Abu Dhabi were going well, and that Washington remains optimistic. But otherwise, the Kremlin and the UAE had not commented on those talks. And Moscow is signaling resistance to this updated 19-point U.S. peace plan, with warnings we're seeing come out of sort of Kremlin aides and those tied to Vladimir Putin that it would reject any deviation from the original draft that aligned more closely with Russian demands. Otherwise, after days of intense negotiations between U.S., Ukraine and European officials, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Ukraine was ready to move forward with this peace plan and accept most of its framework. But Ukraine says the remaining issues, the most sensitive ones, including territorial concessions and questions about security guarantees, would have to be resolved directly between Zelensky and Trump in a leaders' meeting. So that's what Ukraine was putting out today, saying they were ready to travel to the United States in the next 2 days or over the Thanksgiving holiday to try and have these talks with Trump. But just really, I think it was about an hour ago, President Trump on Truth Social said that he was directing his envoy, Steve Witkoff, to meet with Vladimir Putin and sending Army Secretary Driscoll back to meet with the Ukrainians with the aim of finalizing the agreement. So Trump added that he hopes to meet with both Zelensky and Putin soon, but only when the deal is complete or in its final stages. So there's been a lot of developments, coming in today on this, and certainly we're going to be hearing more tomorrow, but waiting to get now really official wording from the Kremlin and from the Russians, because again, the Ukrainians want to drive this over the line willing to meet with Trump, but he seems like he wants to have this more in a final stage before he was going to be doing that. Greta.
Shelby, maybe you can help me out on this. When it was the 28 points, it seemed that Russia wanted it and was on board. Then all of a sudden there was a meeting in Geneva, and it was whittled down. The meeting in Geneva with Ukraine, it was whittled down to 19 from the 28. And then now Russia doesn't like the 19. So it sounds like Russia is now not in agreement. Yet people in the United States are expressing optimism. It doesn't seem like, it doesn't seem like if Russia doesn't want this, I don't care how optimistic everybody else is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what we saw happen was that when this draft was released last week, I mean, when it was leaked and sort of became public, it had been called a Russian wish list. And it was reported that this proposal had a lot of these maximalist demands that Russia has made throughout this war. And the Europeans and the Ukrainians said that it was just crossing too many red lines and that it would equal capitulation. And we even saw pushback in the United States, even on both sides, from Republicans and Democrats on that. So then when these talks happened in Geneva, they tried to take, I would imagine, what we've heard more of the Ukrainian input, but also the Europeans, because the Europeans have continued to emphasize this is about their future as well. They don't want to be setting the groundwork for Russia to launch another or the third invasion of Ukraine. So the Europeans, the Ukrainians were really trying to make sure their concerns were heard, and again, trying to find a common ground. But as you noted, I mean, Vladimir Putin, as these peace talks are going on, they carried out more deadly strikes on civilians. And this is the case every single night in Ukraine. And the Kremlin is not showing any signals that they are ready to, make concessions at this time.
Are there any numbers, and I suspect that they're very squishy in a sense we don't know, but any number on the of the number of civilians who have died in Ukraine since the beginning of this war?
It's really tough to say, Greta, because we don't have access to information in the occupied territories. So one example that always, reminds me in the early days of this war was the Battle of Mariupol, where that city, Ukrainian city, was under siege and flattened by Russian forces. And then Russia did not allow anyone to come in and carry out investigations of war crimes and civilians that are missing, which is in the tens of thousands in regards to those, again, missing and feared dead as well. So we don't have a set figure on what it actually could be. But what I can say is that this year we have seen the highest uptick in attacks carried out by Russia on civilians since this war began, and really specifically since June, with Russia just sending hundreds of drones every single night. Last night, 460 drones, which are just raining down on cities like Kiev, which are incredibly lethal, as proof of civilians being killed this morning. And again, Ukraine already under attack tonight in other parts of the country.
Well, it certainly seems like they're actually targeting civilians with the white report and where they're getting hit, and the fact civilians are getting killed. Shelby Wilder in Kyiv, thank you.
Thank you, Greta.
Coming up, but Turkey takes over the White House press briefing room.
Want to give us a gobble? Very on message.
Information. Truth is power, is freedom, is money, is health, is Newsmax. Millions watch it, so can you. Newsmax is real news for real people.
Hey, I'm Daniel, one of the founders of Ridge. My dad and I realized that most wallets are falling apart, stuffed to the max, and barely fit in your back pocket. So we set out to create something better. Ridge is built to last a lifetime and is the perfect balance of modern style and durability. Find yours at ridge.com.
I am a coach and an alum of Girls on the Run. Kids today carry a lot of stress, from school pressure to social isolation to overuse of devices. We create a space where girls can connect, build confidence, and learn skills like managing emotions, setting goals, and speaking up. Each child's experience is different, and families need support. I'm proud to be part of a comprehensive solution to youth mental health. Get involved today at EmpowerOurFutureCoalition.com.
It's the end of a long day, but your mind's still racing. Meet Super Calm from Nello, PhD formulated with ashwagandha, L-theanine, magnesium glycinate, and vitamin D3 to help support relaxation and healthy cortisol levels. Super Calm from Nello.
Hi, Leslie, the deal-loving llama here. I just got a great deal on new flooring. Lumber Liquidators has the top brands of flooring from Dream Home Laminate to Bellawood Exotics with the best warranties and at incredible prices, up to 60% less than others. Visit your local store or lumberliquidators.com. Worth the drive.
Not again.
Your cold is coming! Your cold is coming!
Thanks, Revere.
We really need to keep Zycam in the house.
Only if you want to shorten your cold. When you feel a cold coming, shorten it with Zycam.
D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser is calling it quits. This afternoon, Washington's Mayor Bowser announced she will not be running for re-election.
Today, with a grateful heart, I am announcing that I will not seek a fourth term. For the next 12 months, let's run through the tape and keep winning for D.C.
Mayor Bowser has spent the last year trying to strike a balance between her constituents and President Trump. Back in August, Mayor Bowser credited the president's surge of law enforcement in our nation's capital.
This federal surge has had a significant increase on crime in Washington, D.C. And we greatly appreciate the surge of officers that enhance what MPD has been able to do in this city.
I should note, Washington, D.C. has no mayoral term limits. Mayor Bowser says her decision not to seek re-election is a personal one. Meanwhile, Waddle and Gobble. Those are the names of the two turkeys who were pardoned today by President Trump. The ceremony was in the Rose Garden at the White House. White House correspondent Mike Carter is at the White House. Mike?
Hey, Greta, good evening. Well, President Trump utilizing his powers as commander-in-chief to provide some clemency for a couple of very special birds just 2 days ahead of the Thanksgiving Day holiday. As you mentioned, turkeys Gobble and Waddle. They're from North Carolina. They had their lives spared by President Trump today during the 78th annual National Thanksgiving Turkey presentation. Waddle was the bird chosen to attend today's special ceremony in the White House Rose Garden. Of course, the official turkey pardon first occurred in 1989 under George H.W. Bush, though some historians point to Abraham Lincoln, who was believed to have saved his son's pet turkey from becoming a Thanksgiving meal back in 1863. We also saw Waddle in the White House press briefing room today. Caroline Levitt introducing Waddle to a mix of photographers and reporters. President Trump saying today he may need to repardon last year's turkeys because of those pardons his predecessor may have not followed proper protocol.
He used an auto pen last year for the turkey's pardon. So I have the official duty to determine, and I have determined that last year's turkey pardons are totally invalid. The turkeys known as Peach and Blossom last year have been located, and they were on their way to be processed, in other words, to be killed. But I have stopped that journey, and I am officially pardoning them.
And President Trump confirming today that Ukraine has agreed to the broad strokes of his 28-point peace plan. As Shelby Wilder just mentioned, the president in the last hour putting out this Truth Social post. The original 28-point peace plan, which was drafted by the United States, has been fine-tuned with additional input from both sides. And there are only a few remaining points of disagreement. In the hopes of finalizing this peace plan, I have directed my special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to meet with President Putin in Moscow. And at the same time, Secretary of the Army Dan Driscoll will be meeting with the Ukrainians. I look forward to hopefully meeting with President Zelensky and President Putin soon, but only when the deal to end this war is final or in its final stages. Here's what Trump had to say this afternoon.
I've also ended 8 wars in 9 months, and we're working on that final war. It's not easy, but I don't know. I think we're going to get there. 25,000 soldiers, Ukraine, Russia. In the last month, 25,000 soldiers have died. So I think we're getting very close to a deal.
And President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump, Greta, will be heading down to Mar-a-Lago later this evening. They'll be spending their Thanksgiving break for the rest of the week in Florida before heading back to the White House. Though with that news on a potential peace plan coming together, we may be hearing more from the president this week, even though he's taking some vacation down south. Greta?
Mike, I just don't understand this. So it was Russia agreed to the 28, then it's been carved down to 19. Everyone is cheering, but Russia hasn't said they're fine with not having the other 8 in it. There are fights over what kind of territory and security agreements. So I don't understand. I mean, I hope everybody's happy, but I just don't see that writing on the wall that we're that close to any sort of peace agreement. But I hope everybody's right.
Yeah, and again, Greta, you know, you've got Steve Witkoff heading to Moscow now to try to work out what has been agreed to, at least in the broad strokes, with Kyiv. And again, we have to wait and see, is this something that Russia will sign on to? You do have 2 peace plans that initially, you had the EU peace proposal that Russia kind of snubbed its nose at. They do say that they are willing to at least hear the president out on his plan that looks to be trending in the right direction. Of course, giving over Ukrainian-held territory, that is something that Ukraine has been not willing to do. Is that something that comes together? And what is the mechanism that holds Russia to its promises in this peace plan? Is there a stick involved here that allows the U.S. and Europe to hold Russia accountable? We'll have to wait and see what comes together later this week in Moscow.
Well, Steve Witkoff doesn't stop trying, that's for sure. Neither does the president. So I tip my hat to them on both of that. Mike Carter, thank you.
Good to see you, Greta.
Now to the indictments dropped this week against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. Former United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, Jay Town, joins me. Nice to see you, Jay. The indictments, the White House has said that they're going to appeal both dismissals, of Letitia James and of James Comey, but it doesn't make much sense to me, since all they have to do for Letitia James, since it's within the statute of limitations, is go back in, present to the grand jury, and then come back out if the grand jury votes to indict again. I don't know why they waste their time doing an appeal on that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, Greta, it's great to see you too. The only reason why they might appeal it is because this is very similar to what's going on in New Jersey in the Third Circuit with Alina Habba. They've sort of told her that she can't be the U.S. attorney for the same reasons found in the 2 opinions levied yesterday dismissing Tish James and Jim Comey's indictments. And so it might just sort of be a collective appeal. They still get 60 days after the appeal if the statute did run on James, they still get 60 days from that date to re-indict her and Jim Comey under 28 U.S.C. 32. Sorry, go ahead.
You may think I think Comey's indictment is over. They've run out of time. I don't know if that statute applies. They're just going to cite me saying it gives the government some sort of leeway. I don't think it does, and maybe you're right. As for the Letitia James, is that, you know, look, I know. I mean, the statute says president appoints a U.S. attorney with advice and consent of the Senate confirmation. In the event that that person leaves, then, of course, there is an interim prosecutor appointed, or U.S. attorney. If that person leaves, then it's supposed to be the federal judges who do it. Well, in the instance in Virginia, is that the federal judges didn't appoint her, and neither did the president with the Senate confirmation.
Yeah, and so you're referring to 28 U.S.C. 546, which is where the interim appointment power of at least Lindsay Halligan came from. The problem I have with the ruling yesterday in both cases is that 546D says that the district court may appoint the interim U.S. attorney until there is a presidentially appointed U.S. attorney put in there, confirmed by the Senate. The word may is very important. There's no analysis of that word in either of the opinions. And the reason why, Greta, it's so important is because if they may appoint, that means there must be authority elsewhere. Nowhere in that statute does it say that the Attorney General is limited to one 120-day period. And don't forget that 120-day period expired with an appointment, an interim appointment, before General Bondi even was confirmed as the Attorney General of the United States. So she had absolutely no say over that interim appointment. Now, go ahead.
Yeah, go on.
Well, the statute I was going to cite to you, though, is 18 U.S.C. 3288. What that statute says is that if an indictment is dismissed for any reason, And but the indictment was had before the statute of limitations runs, but then expires during the time that is dismissed. Then the government has essentially gives the government another 6 months to re-indict that individual.
Here's the problem. That if the indictment was as a former criminal defense attorney, I'll tell you how I'd argue it. That indictment was invalid. So it's not like the indictment was dismissed for some reason. It was an indictment that shouldn't have happened because it didn't meet the appointments clause in our appointment. And they waited to the last minute, and they could have been, they could have had since January 20 if they thought this case should be indicted. So I don't see how this indictment is anything but facially invalid. So I think they're stuck with Comey. As for the other one, they can just run in and go and re-indict her again, and it's back on schedule. But I do think one thing: the trial court judge who dismissed both of them made a fatal mistake. The judge showed I don't know if it was a man or woman, I can't remember, showed his cards. Because in the first sentence, for no reason at all, it gratuitously says that Halligan in Virginia, the U.S. attorney, the interim U.S. attorney, had no experience. And there was just no reason to put that in there. That was just sort of a jab. And at that point, I thought, right when I started to read the opinion, that this judge obviously doesn't like the Trump administration, because that was just so gratuitous.
Yeah, it was an ad hominem attack on Lindsay Halligan. This judge had 6 whole years as a prosecutor back in the 70s, Judge Curry you're referring to. Nothing wrong with that. Thank you for your service, but let's not pretend that you broke records while you were in AUSA. The other part of that is when I was appointed as the United States Attorney by President Trump, my colleagues, there was 93 of us, several of them had no prosecutorial experience. Some were state senators, some came from big law firms. Not everybody was a career prosecutor like me. And some of them were defense lawyers, Greta, you'd be proud to know. So it's not everybody has any prosecutorial experience. It's a ridiculous thing to say. It was nothing but a low jab by a judge who could have taken the high road. Didn't. Chose not to.
And problem is that on the Court of Appeals, I would argue that it would show bias right from the get-go. You don't have to get to the 10th word in the order. J-Town, as always, thank you.
Thank you, Greta.
Coming up, the United States has labeled a Venezuelan group as a foreign terrorist organization. How socialist leader Nicolas Maduro is responding to this new label when the record continues.
Posture matters, and Tommy Copper has the bra for you. Relieve neck and shoulder pain, improve your posture. Look and feel your best every day with back support built right into your bra. The best-selling shoulder support bra from Tommy Copper is the upgrade you need. Comfortable, supportive, designed to help you carry confident posture when it matters most.
Why would I wear any other bra?
Go to TommyCopper.com and save 50%. Upgrade your bra today.
There are only a few men I'd trust with my life. 2 of them built this wallet. I've known the guys behind Proof for nearly 20 years, and we've been through hell and back together. When they told me they were building the wallet, I just said, bill me now, I'm in. This isn't some fashion piece. This isn't just some trend. These wallets are a direct reflection of the kind of men who built it. It's built to last, built to function, and designed to carry everything you need and more. If anything happens to it, they'll take care of it. No questions, no fine print. If you knew the guys who created this wallet, you wouldn't carry anything else. Go check them out, because they built this thing right.
A peace plan for Gaza. For the plan to advance, Hamas must disarm. Instead,
tonight, terrifying images emerging from Gaza. Videos show Hamas-linked gunmen carrying out a public execution as they return to the streets.
Hamas on a rampage, executing Palestinians. Bloody crackdown, spreading terror. For freedom, not terror, Hamas must go.
Hi, I'm Wade Allen Root, the national TV and radio host known as the MAGA warrior and the capitalist evangelist. This presidency is ushering in the golden age of prosperity, and it's all built around making America the energy capital of the world. Enter Lost Soldier Oil and Gas. It took 40 years to piece together this 40,000-acre giant gas discovery. It's estimated to contain up to 6 trillion cubic feet of gas, with a management forecast projecting the first 25 wells alone to produce 400 million cubic feet per day of natural gas. This is how we power the AI future of America with clean natural gas. Headed by oil and gas legend Mark Bruner, whose previous public companies delivered spectacular returns for investors. At their peaks, Pedico Energy grew about 100 to 1 for investors. Ultra Petroleum grew about 1,000 to 1 for investors. To learn more about Lost Soldier Oil and Gas, scan the QR code on the screen or go to lostsoldier.com. That's lostsoldier.com.
'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the barn, treats were all wrapped up, heading out from the farm. Harry and David exclaimed as they drove out of sight, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good bite."
Create a daily workout, whatever workout means for you. Create better habits, habits that stick. Create small wins, and let them add up. We are Create, the creatine gummy made from Creapure, the gold standard of creatine monohydrate, which can support daily energy levels, boost mental clarity, build and retain muscle, and help you feel your best. Learn more about Create at trycreate.co.
Venezuela's socialist leader, Nicolas Maduro, is upping the stakes with the Trump administration. Last night, Maduro said during his TV show, yeah, he has a TV show, it's called With Maduro Plus, but he said, quote, "Whatever they do," meaning the United States, "however they do it, wherever they do it, they will not be able to defeat Venezuela. We are invincible. Whatever they do, they have not been able to defeat our homeland, and they never will," end quote. Those remarks came on the same day that the Treasury Department designated Maduro's cartel, Cartel de los Soles, as a foreign terrorist organization. By the way, despite the White House's insistence, Maduro denies that he is head of that cartel. How tense is it between the United States and Venezuela? Well, here is one clue. The United States has sent a massive military deployment to the Caribbean. Foreign Affairs correspondent Alex Salvi joins me. Alex, what's going on there?
Yeah, Greta, and as if seeing the military in your own backyard isn't enough, now the Trump administration is designating Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization, therefore really opening up new abilities to operate inside of Venezuela. The designation by the State Department targeting a network tied to Nicolas Maduro, of course, accused of trafficking illegal drugs to the United States. But it also gives the White House some legal cover as it considers carrying out military strikes inside of Venezuela. The military buildup in the region, as you point out, undeniable, with 1/3 of the Navy's deployed ships now stationed in the Caribbean. The United States has now carried out 21 strikes on suspected drug boats off of the coast of Venezuela, killing 83 people. And the White House says it has no plans to ease up on the pressure anytime soon.
We view the Maduro regime as being illegitimate, and the president has been very satisfied with the successful strikes against narco-terrorists and foreign terrorists that are illegally trafficking drugs towards the United States of America. He's not going to tolerate that, and you can expect to see those strikes continue.
Now, Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, although he looks happy right there, he's calling the latest designation ridiculous and is warning his people of a looming regime change, saying that the United States merely wants to control the country's vast natural resources. Now, for the U.S., it's reportedly preparing a new phase of military action, although details remain limited at this time. But the new designation could provide the legal framework needed to justify attacks on Venezuela, which could come in the form of airstrikes or even land-based counterterrorism operations. Greta?
Alex Salvi, thank you very much. And he's got some good dance moves, would you say? I don't know what is.
Good or bad, depending on how you want to judge that.
We live in strange times. And Virginia Congressman and member of the Armed Services Committee, John McGuire, joins me. Good afternoon, sir. Tell me, is the White House talking to Congress, talking to you, talking to anyone about what might be the next step against Venezuela?
Well, we don't want to talk to me details about that, but listening to your the statement that Maduro put out last night, maybe he's doing too many of the drugs those narco traffickers are pushing into America, saying that our military has no strength against what they're doing. His regime is illegitimate, and it's about time we have a president standing up to protect the American people. More people died from overdose in the United States from 2020 to 2023 than died in World War II. I've knocked on 6 doors in Virginia's 5th congressional district where a mother cried with me because their 18, 19, 20-year-old son or daughter is dead from fentanyl. And these people are doing criminal activities and harming the American people. And as the commander-in-chief, President Trump and his administration, their number one job is to keep the American people safe. And so we are prepared for whatever comes next.
Well, explain this to me. According to Axios, Trump's told his advisors that he's ready to speak to Maduro. Now, Maduro has under indictment since about 2020 here in the United States, and we have to have 50 million bond on his head. So I'm not so sure, what would they be saying to each other? What could be hypothetically the conversation? Stop sending drugs to the United States? And Maduro said, oh, okay, if you ask me. I mean, it's just absurd. So, I mean, I don't know where this, can you give me a little more guidance where this is headed?
Well, I think we would just be speculating right now. But, President Trump is a great negotiator. But the biggest thing is he wants to keep the American people.
But negotiate what? I mean, the only way you say he's not a legitimate leader. That's true. I mean, every country has recognized him as not winning that last election in July of 2024. I mean, everyone recognizes he's an illegitimate leader. So we negotiate with an illegitimate leader who's under indictment for $50 million to tell him we don't want his drugs to come to the United States. He heads the cartel and makes the money. I just don't see where this conversation goes. I don't know what we ask him.
Well, I think you're saying it without saying it, but we've got to stop this. I mean, like I said, the president's #1 job is to keep the American people safe at home and abroad. And these cartels not just poisoning the American people with these drugs that are killing us, but they're robbing and raping and killing the American people. And they are a terrorist organization, and I support President Trump's efforts to keep us safe.
Is there any talk about the fact that Venezuela doesn't just sell illegal drugs and poison and kill people in the United States? Venezuela is the source. Venezuela and all those little islands down there, including some that I've spent time on, are involved in the most disgusting human trafficking of people, of poor young Venezuelan girls or even other girls from other nations. Is there any discussion about the fact that Venezuela is one of the kingpin human traffickers in this hemisphere?
We talk about that every day in Congress. Human trafficking is modern day slavery, and they say more people are under slavery today than any time in human history. And it's evil and it's horrible. And as a member of Congress, as a Navy SEAL veteran, I'm going to do everything I can to fight that.
Well, the sort of interesting thing about, and I use the word interesting lightly, is that a lot of those countries are part of the Dutch kingdom. I mean, and they're receiving people and they're transferred back and forth. I mean, it's not just Venezuela. I mean, the whole region is really is corrupt, and it's doing the most unthinkable things to humans.
Well, you're right about that. Evil. It's spiritual warfare. It's good versus evil, and we've got to stand against it. And obviously, one of the biggest threats is this terrorist organization. And so this is a step in the right direction to keep the Southern Hemisphere and to keep the American people safe.
What happens? I mean, if Maduro leaves, what happens? I don't think he's going to leave, but I mean, game this out for me.
Well, I guess they would have free elections, and we would have set an example that the American people are important, and whether they're home or abroad, we're going to keep them safe. It's about time. Like I said, it's just common talk in America that more people died from overdose than died in the Vietnam War every year. 5 or 1 Americans is too much. In my district, a 14-year-old girl was raped by a 33-year-old illegal alien who was released from jail 4 times. These people are coming from Venezuela and other places, and it's too much.
Is it, what nobody's, and the other thing to take a little bit farther is that the reason there's so much problem in Venezuela is because they have an inflation rate that is just, we can't even think about it. It's just so skyrocketing. And the reason they have this inflation rate is because this is socialism, and it is a socialism experiment that has failed so drastically, and that is an inevitable result of a failed socialist government that goes back to the early 90s.
You are absolutely right. Look at the history of any country. Socialism always ends up with millions of people dead and tyranny and people suffering. Our country is not perfect, but our form of a government where our God-given rights are enshrined in the Constitution has lifted more people out of poverty, given more people freedom and opportunity than any country or system in history. And socialism is the opposite of that. They take your property and they put their noose around your neck.
Indeed. Virginia Congressman John McGuire, thank you, sir, and happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for having me.
Maybe they thought they were home free, but they thought wrong. More than a month after the Louvre heist, a Paris prosecutor announced 4 more arrests, 2 men and 2 women. They range in age from 31 to 40. It's unclear so far what their suspected roles were. The Louvre was robbed on October 19th, and $102 million worth of jewels were gone in minutes. Some of the loot still has not been recovered. That includes a diamond and emerald necklace Napoleon gave to Empress Marie-Louise. This doesn't surprise. Nuns can control a classroom of 55 kids. I know this from experience. Nuns know how to control. So yes, with the traffic here in D.C., we could use this nun. New video emerging from last week shows the nun in Rome taking traffic into her own hands. Good for her. A local report says a public bus tried to get around a car that was illegally parked near the Coliseum. The nun waved her arms directing traffic, and the drivers all smartly listened to her. They don't want their knuckles wrapped with a ruler. Someone even shouted from his window, quote, "Thank the Lord," end quote. Coming up, could there be a link between sleep apnea and Parkinson's disease? That when the record continues.
He loves the Constitution. He fights for what's right. He hates the bad guys. He's a freedom warrior. He's your freedom warrior. Watch Carl Higbie every weeknight on Newsmax.
This is the story of the one who knows well-prepared workdays take off smoothly and land right on time. That's why he counts on Grainger. With next-day delivery and professional-grade products, Grainger helps ensure he, his crew, and thousands of passengers fly through the day like clockwork. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
As a neurologist, my patients are often concerned with age-related memory decline. I recommend Cunol Brain Health with 2 powerful, high-absorption ingredients clinically shown to improve memory, focus, attention, and more. Cunol, the brand I trust.
You got better things to do than clean out clogged gutters. Call Leaf Filter today and never clean out clogged gutters again.
Leaf Filter's technology keeps debris out of your gutters for good. Guaranteed. Call 833-LEAF-FILTER today or visit leaffilter.com.
The Ridge wallet is iconic at this point, but I'm just going to speak facts here. It's slim, it's RFID blocking, it's awesome, it's comfortable, I love it. I carry it every day. And then every wallet at ridge.com has like an unlimited lifetime warranty, so you don't have to worry about it falling apart. Check it out at ridge.com.
Every day across the globe, big business agendas go unseen by investors. Things that go against your core values and beliefs. It's time to know your investments. Abortion, alternative lifestyles, gender and identity confusion. If you believe in protecting marriage and life, children, innocence, guarding masculinity, restoring families, defending religious liberty, invest with your values. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the investment company. This and other important information can be found in the fund's prospectus. To obtain a copy, visit timothyplan.com or call 800-846-7526. Read each prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal.
Hi, I'm Ben Cozy. Isn't holiday travel a pain in the neck? You're cramped, uncomfortable, and forget about getting any rest. There's nothing cozy about airplane seats or hard plastic benches, and those so-called travel pillows, they just don't cut it. You don't need another travel pillow. You need Be Cozy, the world's most comfortable neck pillow. Trapped in the middle seat? Wrap Be Cozy around your neck to stop chin drop, bobblehead napping. Smashed up against the window? Fold Be Cozy over and tuck it onto your shoulder for super side support. Frequent flyer miles got you sitting aisle? Turn Be Cozy to the side for the perfect pillow position. Hey, everyone wants to be cozy, so get the world's most comfortable travel neck pillow and be cozy like me, Ben Cozy. You get to be cozy. Everyone gets to be cozy. Only Be Cozy has patented overlapping arms so you get double support and the comfort you need in any seat on any trip. Go online right now and get this special holiday offer. Buy one Be Cozy, get one 50% off. So don't wait. Get yours now.
a reason why those who snore may want to see a doctor, because a new study published today in the journal JAMA Neurology suggests a link between sleep apnea and Parkinson's disease. Sleep apnea is a condition that causes temporary pauses in breathing during sleep. A study published today found that sleep apnea, if left untreated, led to a higher risk of Parkinson's. Researchers examined the electronic health records of more than 11 million U.S. military veterans between 1999 and 2022. Researchers found veterans with an untreated sleep apnea were nearly twice as likely to have developed Parkinson's disease within the 6 years. Assistant Professor of Neurology at Oregon Health and Science University, Dr. Lee Neilson joins me. Dr. Neilson helped lead the sleep apnea study. Good afternoon, sir. And tell me, what causes sleep apnea?
Well, when we're talking about obstructive sleep apnea, it's usually a physical problem. So in our upper airway, if that collapses at night, then we're not getting the appropriate amount of oxygen to our brains.
And what an obstructive would that be from, in some instances, for instance, obesity? Does that contribute to the obstruction, or is it just a thin person can have it?
You know, the prototypical person is someone who is overweight, has an elevated BMI, a thick neck, but it could also be issues with enlarged tonsils or adenoids, really any sort of structural problem that's going to impede good airflow.
All right, now tell me what Parkinson's is, because my next question after that is why sleep apnea would be linked to Parkinson's.
Yeah, so Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disorder, one of the most common and one of the fastest growing disorders right now. It's characterized typically by a bunch of what we call motor symptoms. And so people think about tremor, stiffness in their muscles, a change in the way they walk, change in their posture and shuffling. They really slow down, and that's what the disease is. We have a lot to understand why exactly it happens and who is going to get it. But we do know that there are certain brain regions that are very susceptible to this. Why we thought about this link was there's other sleep problems that are associated with Parkinson's disease. And we thought, well, if the brain is not getting the right amount of oxygen in sleep apnea, maybe that is one hit along the pathway of getting this disease.
Does everybody who snores have sleep apnea, or is that a symptom of sleep apnea? And do some people who don't snore at all have sleep apnea?
I think you've got it exactly right. So snoring is just going to be one sign. And if your bed partner is telling you that you snore, maybe take it seriously and talk to your doctor. Maybe it's worthwhile getting tested. But not everybody with sleep apnea is going to snore.
And so how would you know if you, if let's say you're a 40-year-old person, you seem relatively healthy, you're thin, you don't snore, why would you even suspect that you have sleep apnea?
Well, if you've got unrefreshing sleep, or you're waking up with headaches that tend to go away as you start your day, those might be some other clues.
What is the treatment for both sleep apnea and for Parkinson's?
Yeah, those are two very different things. So in Parkinson's disease, it's a problem of low dopamine in the brain. And so really the primary medication approach is to try to supplement that. And we give a medication called levodopa, and that's that precursor to building that dopamine and helping our motor circuits start to work a little bit better. With sleep apnea, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you sleep apnea.
Yeah, with sleep apnea, it's a little bit different. So our airway in obstructive sleep apnea is collapsing. And so right now, the gold standard approach is to try to provide this positive pressure to open up that airway. And that's what the CPAP device does.
Is there any surgery, because I see ads on TV and stuff like that, is there any surgery that can help with the obstruction?
Yeah, absolutely, that's possible. So there could be a removal of the tonsils and adenoids might be effective. There's some newer implantable nerve stimulators that can actually just push the tongue forward. So maybe you've got a thick tongue that's collapsing backward on your airway. If you can move that obstruction out of the way, that might help too. That's a newer procedure and not something that we were able to look at in our study in particular.
In terms of this treatment there for Parkinson's, does it work? Because I see these, stories of very young Michael J. Fox. His Parkinson's is pretty vicious. Does the treatment work?
You're talking about the levodopa that I mentioned?
Yeah. Does that work? Yeah. Are people with Parkinson's or just have tremors? If you just have a tremor, does it really work?
Yeah, this is my area of clinical expertise. I see a lot of people with Parkinson's, and levodopa is by and large the first option that I'm going to. And almost universally, people have a pretty good response.
And what's the second one? What's the next step if that medication doesn't work?
Yeah, after levodopa, you've got another class of medications called dopamine agonists. So instead of replacing dopamine, you can kind of stimulate those dopamine receptors. There are other medications that can delay the breakdown of dopamine, so more of it can sit around in the system and get used. And then it depends on the complications that emerge. We also have other tools that we might be able to use then. This is a very heterogeneous disease. I say if you know one person with Parkinson's, you know one person with Parkinson's, and their experience is going to be unique.
And Doctor, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And it's time for our Outrage of the Day alert. Wait to hear this one. An unemployed man in Italy is being accused of dressing up as his dead mother. Why? To collect her pension. The bizarre and outrageous case is being called the Mrs. Doubtfire scandal. That's from the 1993 movie starring Robin Williams. In that movie, a recently divorced father poses as a housekeeper to see his children. Italian authorities say instead of reporting his mother's death, the 56-year-old man who has not been identified put his 82-year-old mother's corpse in a sleeping bag and stashed it in the laundry room of their family home. The man held his mother's corpse for 3 years. That's until a government employee finally picked up on his scheme. According to reports, the son was able to pocket about $61,000 each year between his mother's pension and her property. The son is being investigated for illegally concealing a body and benefit fraud. By the way, officials reportedly do not suspect foul play in his mother's death. Coming up, could there be snow and rain for you on Thanksgiving? We have the weather forecast for you when the record continues.
When you want gifts to express a lifetime of love, choose hand-picked holiday treasures from Harry & David. Iconically American, crafted with joy, and made to share for generations.
Nearly home. Whodunit?
We're looking for a house closer to everything, but we don't know where to start.
Find it with Realtor.com. With Real Commute, it's easy to find a home closer to what's ever close to your heart. Do y'all recycle? Realtor.com.
Consumer Cellular knows there are a lot of offers flying around, but they slip away too fast. We don't play games. What you see is what you get. Bet you're glad you wore cargo pants. See how we can cut your bill. Call Consumer Cellular.
OmniWatch is here to make the internet safe again. You know, back when you and your family could bank, browse, and shop without worrying about having your identity stolen. From as low as $7 a month, you get 24/7 support that never sleeps. Save up to 35% on an annual plan today.
Hello, everyone. It's President Donald J. Trump, and it's Trump time. Check out this red beauty. It's one of my new watches. Wear it proudly on your wrist, and everyone will know exactly what it's for, who it represents. It's really going to be something special. It's for your favorite president. Get your watch today at gettrumpwatches.com. These make a great gift. It's Trump time.
Hey guys, Viagra is not your only option.
Rove Sparks act fast and stay active longer. They aren't pills. Sparks dissolve under your tongue to reach your bloodstream for speedy results. Connect with a provider at rove.co/sparks.
The sweet sound of Monday morning. Somehow you're both wired and wiped out at the same time. Meet Super Calm from Nello, a simple mix to help support healthy cortisol levels and bring you back into balance. Super Calm from Nello.
You woke up with a sore throat and a low-grade fever. You know you are getting sick, so here's your choices. You can get sicker and miss work, try to see a doctor this week, or sit hours in a crowded waiting room at urgent care.
I have a smarter option for you. Open your medical emergency kit. Match your symptoms to doctor-recommended prescription in your booklet and take the right meds now and get well faster.
This is not a first aid kit. It's like having an urgent care in your home. It includes doctor-prescribed medications to treat over 39 medical issues like respiratory infections, strep throat, pneumonia, UTIs, and more.
No waiting to see the doctor and no standing in line at the pharmacy. It's right here.
Every home should have at least one medical emergency kit, and here's how to order.
Order online and save $45. Your kit to treat dozens of common and serious illnesses is rushed to your door. Visit urgentcarekit.com/news, promo code NEWS. That's urgentcarekit.com/news, promo code NEWS.
12,000 years ago, during the Ice Age, a volcano erupted for the last time, and since then it's been dormant. That is, until this week. A volcano in northeastern Ethiopia is now active again. On Sunday, the volcano suddenly exploded. As of now, no casualties have been reported. But this eruption is so big that it can be seen from space. On your screen are satellite images of black smoke from the volcano. The clouds of ash cover parts of Pakistan and northern India. These clouds are also moving east towards China. Now, turning back to the United States, AAA says more than 81 million people will travel this Thanksgiving holiday. But what might complicate that? Well, you know her well. She is Mother Nature. For more on that, what you can expect, meteorologist Amy Metz joins me. Amy?
Thank you, Greta. Yeah, there's some people that need to really watch out this Thanksgiving week. Tornado behind me. This happened yesterday in Texas. Another one last night in Mississippi. There were plenty of warnings across Louisiana. And thankfully, things are moving on before the holiday. But what happened last night was reported as an EF1 in Texas, in the Houston suburb, and an EF2. We're looking at one right now on the screen that was from Klein, Texas. This is about 25 miles north of downtown Houston, and reportedly an estimated 100 homes has been damaged. Unfortunately, people will be having to clean up all of this mess before Thanksgiving. However, no injuries, no deaths were reported. As we go through the rest of the night, we're still looking for some hot spots between Birmingham and Montgomery, Alabama, eastern Mississippi, and parts of Georgia for severe weather down to the Gulf Coast. But so far, things have not been tornadic. And as we go into the next week, there is some snow in the forecast. So just keep in mind, if you're traveling the Northwest through Denver on Thanksgiving, will likely have some snow, rain on the Oregon and Washington coasts, as well as lake effect snow. That's going to be happening near the Great Lakes, and then after the holiday near New York. So hopefully everybody can get through those storms and that tornado damage okay before the holiday here. Back to you, Greta.
Amy Metz, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
Coming up, imagine having a really picky eater over for Thanksgiving. That when the record continues.
You hear the same voices. Donald Trump knows that's a lie. From the same people. Donald Trump is less lucid. Saying the same thing.
Insults, invective, and outright lies.
And you say, enough! I'm Chris Salcedo, and I'll tell you the real news. You don't believe me? Just tune in.
Do you have a yo-yo smile? Sometimes yellow, sometimes white. It's a constant battle between everyday stains and whitening treatments. Until now, get Smile Actives, the daily teeth whitening breakthrough that gives you a more youthful smile and helps you keep it.
At 43 years old, I don't mess around with products that waste my time. Smile Actives is easy, and it works. No gloopy trays, no messy strips. Just add a little bit on top of your toothpaste when you brush your teeth. And ta-da! White teeth.
Just add Smile Actives to your favorite toothpaste and watch the magic happen. Our patented Polyclean microfoam lifts away deep stains for a dramatically younger and whiter smile.
You have a choice. You can have those yellow teeth and just be old Nana or Pop-Pop, or you could be smiling and dazzling and full of confidence. I love my white teeth.
Scan, click, or call for your whitest smile yet. And if you order right now, we'll double your whitening free. Get an extra Smile Actives as our free gift to you, but only while supplies last.
I drink coffee every day. I started noticing that my teeth were not as bright as I like them to be, a little dingy, but Smile Active, it works. Got your boy gleaming.
100% of users saw whiter teeth. Smile Actives lifts away even the toughest stains from coffee, wine, and food, gently restoring your bright, youthful smile. Plus, it's safe for veneers, crowns, and dentures.
It's really a no-brainer if you want to whiten your teeth.
Clinically shown to brighten your teeth 5 shades whiter in just 7 days.
If you could use something so easy like Smile Actives to take yellow teeth to white teeth, why wouldn't you?
Act now. Get Smile Actives for just $24.95 and we'll double your order free. But hurry, this deal won't last. Smile Actives is guaranteed to work. Whiten your teeth or get your money back. No questions asked. Don't wait. Get Smile Actives for just $24.95 and we'll send you a second bottle absolutely free. That's free shipping, a free extra bottle. That's an incredible 58% savings. Scan the code, go to smileactives.com or call to get your beautiful whiter smile now.
Hi, I'm Bob Webster. You know, in cold weather, I'll bet you every farmer, rancher, and homeowner in the country worries about their pipes freezing and breaking. Well, the Freeze Miser ends that worry. No batteries, no wires, just some amazing technology that lets it sense when the temperature of the water in the pipes drops to 37 degrees. Then it starts releasing exactly the right amount of water. Check it out at freezemiser.com or at your favorite nursery, garden center, hardware, or farm and ranch store. It's the Freeze Miser, and it works.
Invest in Ukraine now. Ukraine is rebuilding, innovating, and shaping the future. Because Ukraine is the potential. Kyivstar is Ukraine's leading digital operator. Invests in Ukraine's connectivity, entertainment, ride-hailing, healthcare, and innovation. It's time to think opportunity. It's time to think Ukraine now.
There are only a few men I'd trust with my life. 2 of them built this wallet. I've known the guys behind Proof for nearly 20 years, and we've been through hell and back together. When they told me they were building the wallet, I just said, bill me now, I'm in. This isn't some fashion piece. This isn't just some trend. These wallets are a direct reflection of the kind of men who built it. It's built to last, built to function, and designed to carry everything you need and more. If anything happens to it, they'll take care of it. No questions, no fine print. If you knew the guys who created this wallet, you wouldn't carry anything else. Go check them out, because they built this thing right.
Patrol horses with the Tampa Bay Police Department got to do something extraordinary this Thanksgiving. These horses picked their favorite course for Thanksgiving. Some chose turkey over ham, rolls over cornbread, and even their favorite dessert options. It's unclear if the horses got to eat all their picks, but they did have fun getting into the Thanksgiving spirit. Anyway, happy Thanksgiving to you, and hopefully you have a diverse selection of treats like these special horses did. The Chris Salcedo Show is up next. Stay with Newsmax.